welcome back to GABL. As always, I'm Don.
And I'm Jonathan.
And we are glad that you have joined us once again. Jonathan, why don't we get right into the topic of what we're going to be discussing today?
Well, as you can see as the title of the episode, today we're talking about the DC Sniper.
DC Sniper.
Or DC Snipers, as we come to find out.
Yes, there was more than one. Yeah. And do you remember anything about this time period?
I do. So I was pretty young. I was only about 11 when this was going down.
Okay.
But I do remember my people around me talking about it, and that, of course, affected me. I remember the fear that was in the air of things going on, because this is right on the heels of 9/11, right?
Yes,
we had that horrible terrorist attack where lots of people died, and then we had, right after that, the anthrax.
The anthrax, yes.
Somebody was mailing, for those of you who are less inclined, or less enlightened, I don't know, if you might not know or don't remember, there was somebody mailing anthrax. They mailed anthrax to the President of the United States. And
they mailed it to Congress.
And they were mailing it to news outlets and different places. And then there was like these copycats that were mailing stuff that wasn't anthrax, but they made it look like anthrax just to scare people.
Yeah, you would think that would be a punishable offense.
Oh, it was.
Okay. I wasn't sure that they were. I couldn't remember.
There is a thing, especially after 9/11, you cannot even pretend like you're going to be a terrorist or cause terror.
Okay.
Because if you cause terror with people thinking that you're a terrorist and there's no harm done, it's like some sort of fear-mongering or something.
It's basically like screaming
yelling
fire.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the same line as that. That's right.
Got it. Okay.
So, yeah.
See, I was 23 at the time, and so I remember this whole scenario vividly. And I remember the fear that was going about everywhere. You know, you had September 11th, the absolute fear that brought. It brought total changes. How we flew, how we drove, everything was changed because of September 11th.
Yeah, it is a different world now.
Yes, and then we moved right in, like you said, to the anthrax thing. And then when we went from there into this scenario, which we'll talk about more, but I remember the fearfulness around the nation, and I think that's probably why this story gripped America and the world so much, is because of the time frame that it was set in.
Right.
Right after September 11th.
Right on the heels of these two horrible terrorist activities, yes.
Yeah, so why don't we talk a little bit?
The gentleman we're talking about today, his name is John Allen Williams. So John Allen Williams actually converted to Islam in the late 1980s. So he was reading they read, the Quran, right? Uh-huh. And he changes his name to John Allen Muhammad after he converts to Islam, something to do with his conversion. He has 3 kids and a wife. Now, his wife notices John is becoming more detached and more cold than usual. So John is in the National Guard. He gets deployed for 3 months in the National Guard.
To the Gulf, correct? To the Middle East? Okay.
So he's in the Gulf. He's deployed with his everybody else in the National Guard, whatever they're doing, their encampment. Mm-hmm. And his fellow soldiers are making fun of him because he's wearing a headscarf.
Okay.
And what's up with you wearing a headscarf? What's going on, man? So they're giving him a hard time, according to this book I read called Sniper. I didn't read the whole thing, read excerpts. And they are really harassing this guy over his headscarf. So he is really jilted over his fellow soldiers making fun of him. And he starts to build up this animosity towards the National Guard and other people in the military.
Okay.
And actually, there's an incident. So in their tent while they're sleeping, somebody had thrown a thermite grenade into the tent.
What is a thermite grenade?
Well, thermite is something that burns very hot, like something like 2,000 degrees. It's a mixture of aluminum and iron oxide.
Okay.
So I'm glad you asked. And it has to be ignited with magnesium. Well, these grenades have magnesium in them, and they explode, and they burn really hot. So they can burn metal or through safes or lots of things.
Got it.
They burn incredibly hot, and they burn pretty slow, relatively slow. They're a lot slower than an explosion.
Okay.
But they're made to melt things. Anyway, someone threw a thermite grenade into the tent. Everybody got out safely, but all the soldiers suspected John Muhammad did it because this is the guy that wore their headscarves, and they've all been making fun of him. And suddenly there's a grenade in their tent, and they don't think it was an insurgent, because why would an insurgent come all the way into their camp, throw a grenade close enough to throw a grenade, and somehow sneak away?
That would be hard to get through the security of the encampment.
Now, there's not a whole lot of sources on this. It's just in this one book I found. I don't find any news sources on this, but take it for what it's worth. We think this happened, according to our best research here, and they did not like Mr. John Muhammad.
So his wife noticed the changes.
Once he gets back, after his 3 months deployment, he gets back and his wife noticed him change even more. So now, after his conversion and after he goes to the military and they made fun of him, now he's even more cold and more detached from his wife and very rude to her. The only person he's nice to, or the only people here he's nice to, are his children.
Okay, so before that, there was another man that was a good friend of his named Robert Holmes. We'll talk about Robert later in the show. But Robert also noticed a detachment and a change. He noticed that when he got back from the Gulf War, that on his return from the Middle East, he had changed so drastically. And this is a quote. He said, he looked the same, but inside he was completely different. He was no longer John, end of quote. And one of the things that happened with him is he grew extremely bitter at the Army, and they noticed there was a real bitterness against his country. And I'm wondering if maybe that bitterness was due to the fact that all these guys in the Army was making fun of him.
Maybe. Yeah.
Well, okay, so at the same time, well, you've got John Muhammad.
Well, I don't
here.
even know if some of those things actually happened because, like I said, there's limited sources on those accounts.
Yes. But at the same time, while you have John Muhammad in the Army, all of that, there was another named Lee Boyd Malvo. Lee Boyd Malvo was born in Jamaica, and his childhood, from what I researched, was pretty up and down.
Mostly down from what I read about him. He didn't know his father really. His mom was. His mom
was an extremely hard worker, but she was
doing her best as a single mom.
Yeah,
right?
and so all she did was work. She would leave the kids at home for days by themselves, so he basically had no father figure. He had no mother, so it was just a kid raising a kid, basically. And he just desperately craved the attention
and this
of
is
a
young boy Lee Malvo you're talking
Lee Boyd Malvo, yes.
So, but jumping back to John real quick, let's wrap up, or let's catch him up to the story.
Okay.
So after he gets back from his 3 months deployment, his wife said he was even more cold and distant than before, as I mentioned. So she tells him she wants a divorce, so they separate. They don't actually, as far as I can tell, file a divorce and separate the custody.
Yeah, I don't find that either. Yeah.
They just separate. So John comes back to pick up the kids to go shopping, air quotes, and instead of taking the kids to go shopping, he takes them and they flee to the Caribbean.
That's amazing.
Takes his 3 kids.
Yes, how did he even pull that off?
Don't know how he pulled this one off, but he did.
So did they have documentation? Did they have
passports?
passports?
Yeah, who knows?
The only thing that I can think of on that is maybe when you look into what John ended up doing for work once he got to the Caribbean, maybe they did.
That's good. Maybe that has something to do with it. Because what John did when he got to the Caribbean, people, was he was making fake IDs and forging documents and selling them and helping immigrants flee the country and whatever they were doing.
He was basically running almost this station for illegal immigrants is what it appears to me. And so he's making these false IDs and these fake documents, helping these people. And then doesn't something happen where the authorities find him out? Or
well, before they find him out, what happens is he meets the gentleman you were talking about, the young boy. He's 15 at this time. His name is Lee Boyd Malvo.
Yes.
Lee Boyd Malvo meets John, and John kind of takes Lee Boyd Malvo under his wing. Lee doesn't have a father figure in his life, so he kind of looks to John as his father figure. And John is kind of helping him out. John is giving him things and being nice to him.
Giving him that attention that he's craved and all of that. And at the same time, Lee Boyd Malvo's mother, who's working so hard, is basically desperate to get to the U.S. And so my research states that basically that's where the tie-in was because of the immigration documents.
Maybe she used John for some of her documents?
Basically,
wow.
And so that's how they got that connection.
Interesting. Well, I do know after the authorities were catching on to what he was doing, so this is the police, whatever the police are, we'll just call them the authorities in Antigua. They were catching on to what John Muhammad was doing, so John Muhammad flees again. This time he goes back to the United States with his 3 children.
He takes his 3 children, yes, okay.
But when they go to court, his wife had filed against him because he had taken the kids and he had taken them out of the country, and they were gone for a year and a half.
That's amazing. Yes.
She hasn't seen her kids for a year and a half. So she files all these hearings with the court, and the court suspend his visitation rights.
Yes.
And he is furious.
Okay, so this is September of 2001. Is that correct?
Right.
Yes. Okay, so September of 2001, he goes to court for this preliminary deal, and his visitation rights are suspended. Mm-hmm. And at this point, a couple of different pieces of research that I found said that it was at that point when part of it was he was very angry. In fact, I actually listened to the audio of that court proceeding. They have the actual audio. And one of the things is just a preliminary hearing, so the judge...
They temporarily suspend his rights, right? Or his visitation.
Exactly, and it's not a point where, hey, we're going to tell all the story. It's just, look, you give the kids back to the mother, your rights are temporarily suspended. We'll meet again, and we'll have, a kind of...
But that wasn't good enough for John.
No,
this pushed him over the edge.
It pushed him over the edge. He was very upset, and you can hear him even getting upset in the audio recording that he can't tell his side of the story. It's like, hey, this isn't the time or the place to tell your side of the story. But they do say that moment made him so angry, and it did send him over the edge. And he vows to get revenge on his wife.
Well, his now ex-wife, Mildred, probably sensed that anger in him, and so she changes her name and then takes the kids, and they move away. And John Muhammad doesn't know where they go, but he has his suspicions.
Okay. Now, just kind of backtracking just a second.
Sure.
Isn't it true that John Muhammad, as a father, was a pretty good dad, it would appear?
From the friends of John Muhammad, yes, he is as distant and as cold as he was to his wife. He was, from other accounts, a good father. He paid attention to his kids, gave them time.
He loved them, gave them... Yeah, okay. So, but they do say that John Muhammad had a real issue, and we'll talk more about this later, but he had a real issue that he felt unrecognized all throughout his childhood.
Yeah.
And so...
Which may be one of the things that let him gravitate towards the Islam thing. He was looking to fill that void in his life.
Yes, and also would eventually at some point want to feel the power. That's why, and we'll get more into this, where he said that he was God. But yeah, so he's a good father, and his wife, Mildred...
She takes the kids, and she flees, and John Muhammad isn't quite sure where the wife and kids go, or now ex-wife and kids go, so... John is very upset, obviously, so he reaches out to Lee Malvo back in the Caribbean. He tells Lee, he's like, hey, son, Lee's calling him dad, and even though they were only together for about half a year.
They got that close.
Yeah, they got really close, so he convinces Lee to move to the United States. So Lee gets the paperwork together and immigrates to the United States.
Okay, so he gets here, and then so Lee Malvo and John Muhammad... They're living with some friends, and
so now they're together, right?
They're together every day.
Father figure, and
yes, he's calling him son, he's calling him dad, and every day they said after school, they would both go to the shooting range and they would shoot for hours, and to the point that Lee Malvo actually became a better shot than John Muhammad.
Wow.
He was an amazing shot.
Yeah, he was pretty talented. So he was only 16, but he was between the ages of 15 and 17 as this is all going down.
Yes. And so not only were they going to the shooting range, but each day they were talking about guns, going over guns. They were in fact, he had, this is a little bit controversial, but John Muhammad was having Lee Malvo watch what they call or term desensitizing movies.
Yeah, I heard about that. So I heard that he was having him play violent video games, and some people attribute the violent video games to the desensitization that Lee Malvo had towards killing people later on.
Yeah. And wasn't he listening to? He was listening to music.
So John Muhammad had him listen to this rap music that had something along the lines with the evil white man was trying to enslave their race. And I think he wanted Lee Malvo to feel the same way John Muhammad did. So he has this adopted son, and he's like, man, I want this guy to. So basically, he was wanting Lee Malvo. Sorry to interrupt. He was wanting Lee Malvo to kind of take on his bitterness towards the U.S. Is that kind of what? Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I get out of this story, because I don't think he was set out to desensitize this boy. I just think he wanted someone to be like-minded. I think he wanted a prodigy. I think he wanted someone to be like him. And in order to get this Lee Malvo to think like him, he started introducing him to that music that fueled some of his anger, started getting him to play those video games to attribute to his desensitization.
Yes.
And I think that's what happened. I think what he did was he was making a child soldier.
And he had found a ready student, somebody who was very hungry for the knowledge, because Lee Malvo didn't have a father figure, and so he was just hanging on every word that John Muhammad would say.
And John Muhammad was exploiting that, and he had him on a strict diet and a strict workout regimen. You got to remember, John Muhammad was in the military, so he knew about discipline, he knew about exercise, and he knew how to
mental state and all of that.
To get someone into that state of mind where, hey, we have missions to do, you need to accomplish your mission. But instead of serving your country, he was convincing this young man to serve their means and what they were going to do, which was killing innocent people.
Now, this is very interesting, because keep in mind that hearing that we discussed between John and his wife Mildred, that happened in, remember, September of 2001.
Right.
Okay, so February 16th of 2002, which is just 6 months, 6 to 7 months. When you think about it, that shows you how intense John Muhammad was training Lee Malvo to get his mind to go from what would seem like a decent kid to a cold-blooded killer in 6 months. He had to be putting this kid through sensory overload with all of the stuff that he was training him. Because February 16th, 2002, John Muhammad gave Malvo his first test or his first assignment.
Yeah, test of loyalty, so to speak. So he had him go up to one of Mildred's, his ex-wife's friends' homes.
Isa Nichols.
Yeah, Isa Nichols. He goes to her house and he tells Lee Malvo to ring the doorbell, and when she answers the door, to shoot her.
Yeah, but the problem is and by the way, Isa Nichols, the reason why he wanted to kill her is because she was the one that had strongly encouraged Mildred, the wife,
to leave John,
and divorce John. And so he's angry with her. Now, the one thing that they didn't count on, and that is Nichols' niece, who was 21 years old. Her name was Kenya Cook. She wasn't supposed to be at the home. Okay, but she was.
Oh, and she answered the door.
She answered the door, and Malvo shot her right in the face, and killed her and took off running. And from that moment, February 16th, 2002, which is only 6 months after he had started training him, they started a spree of robbing and killing around the United States.
Man.
So why don't you, I know you've done quite a bit of research.
Was successful in getting this guy to be a little killing machine.
A child soldier in many ways. Now, I know you've done quite a bit of research on some of the victims around the U.S.
Yeah, so one of the earlier victims was a gentleman that had just bought some sneakers in a store. It was late at night. He gets these sneakers, goes to his car or his pickup. I'm not sure what kind of vehicle it was. Doesn't matter to this story. But he notices he has a flat tire. Well, John Muhammad and Lee Malvo had popped one of his tires, slashed one of his tires.
This is the one in Louisiana. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, continue on. Sorry.
So the gentleman comes back out and he sees a flat tire. These guys are like, hey, John Muhammad, telling this gentleman, you got a flat tire? I need some help. He says, no, I'm good, man, guys. I got a spare. So he goes to the back and he's getting his spare tire out, about to change his tire. And John Muhammad and Lee Malvo, they're both kind of harassing this guy, but mostly Lee Malvo. John Muhammad backs off and lets Lee take on this guy by himself. So Lee approaches him again. And the gentleman says, hey, I told you I don't need any help with this changing of this tire. Well, that's when Lee Malvo pulls out a .22 caliber handgun and shoots the gentleman.
That gentleman's name was John Gaeta.
Yeah,
by the way.
Shoots John Gaeta at point blank range. The bullet goes into John Gaeta's neck and out his shoulder. Now, this didn't really injure John Gaeta too badly, and he noticed he didn't feel a whole lot of pain, but he knew he had just been shot. He was only 5 feet away when the gun went off. So he falls to the ground and feigns like he's dead.
He was like, this is the only way I can get out of this, is I got to play like I'm dead.
It's the only thing he could think of, play dead, maybe this guy will go away and maybe I'll survive. Well, sure enough, Lee Malvo just goes through the gentleman's pocket and takes his wallet, and Lee Malvo takes off. Well, that gentleman jumps up, runs back into the store where he just bought his tennis shoes and says, I don't know what just happened. Someone just shot me. I thought it was a real gun, but it might have been a paintball gun. I don't know. But it was crazy. And then the store clerk said, sir, you're bleeding. He says, I'm what? He said, you're bleeding. So he goes to the hospital. And at the hospital, they determined that the bullet is a through and through his neck, out his shoulder, and it didn't hurt his spine, it didn't hurt any major arteries or blood vessels, and it didn't touch a bone.
Wait, you're telling me that he shot him through the neck, and it did not
in the neck, out the shoulder.
Wow.
Yeah,
and
22 caliber bullets tend to kind of get
they're pretty
wonky.
fast. Yeah, but it went through his neck, and it never hit his spinal cord.
No.
Or anything like that.
That's right.
That's unbelievable.
In fact, the hospital released him after just an hour of having him admitted.
That is amazing.
So he was all right.
That's a true miracle. That really is. Now, speaking of that, this is skipping ahead, but John Gaeta would, in March, I believe it was March 1st, 2010, he did receive a letter of apology from Malvo.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is that's an interesting...
A very short, concise, like one paragraph letter that said he's sorry. That's
yes,
right.
But anyways, moving on. So at that point, they're bouncing around. I know they had killings all over the place.
By the way, they thought he had killed them. So this was another sort of loyalty test. So John Muhammad was making sure Lee Malvo was devoted, right? He wanted to make sure he was killing these people because what John Muhammad was doing was making their way over to Washington, D.C., where he believed Mildred was.
Yes, because they had killed several different places. I know they killed, one of their first killings was in Tucson, Arizona, on a golf course, just because it was near the sister's house. And it was like he was testing his loyalty, and he was a little minion. He was making or asking him to do things to see if he would be willing and how far he would go.
That's right. And so they started stealing things, and one of the things they stole was an AR-15 style rifle with a Bushnell holographic sight on it.
Okay.
It was a .223 caliber rifle. They also stole a briefcase of cash from a gentleman who owned an Italian restaurant. He was apparently... So I don't know how they figured out this guy had cash, but they shoot this restaurant owner who had cash, and they steal a suitcase of cash. Suitcase of cash. Doing a podcast, can't talk. And so now they have money and a weapon. So with this money, they go and they purchase a blue Chevy Caprice, which is going to be the vehicle they use for their future killings.
Yes, the 1989 Chevy Caprice. Now, during this time, they're not doing these killings as snipers. Correct? They're doing them like...
No, they're out in the open.
They're out in the open, going up to them, shooting,
they're in Alabama, and they rob a liquor store, and they kill 2 people in the liquor store. They're just madmen.
Yes, they were. Okay.
So once they get this Chevy Caprice, they modify it. They cut a hole in the back just above the license plate into the trunk. So there's a hole clean through the trunk to the exterior of the vehicle. So what they can do is lay down in the trunk, they fold the seats down, lay down prone in the trunk, and they're able to aim the rifle through the hole in the rear of the vehicle. So one guy could be driving, John Muhammad, and another guy could be laying prone
shooting
out the rear, shooting through the hole, which is Lee Malvo. That's right. So they had this little mobile sniper's nest going on.
Wow. And all of that was from his training in the military.
Yeah, he knew if we are in concealment, they're not going to know where we're from. They don't see the gun. They don't see the muzzle flash. They're not going to know.
And that created some of the biggest fear in this whole thing was once they started shooting in the Washington, D.C. area, which we're headed to next.
And it's not like they stuck the barrel out of the hole. They were probably completely inside the trunk, which also muffled some of the sound.
Yes, so nobody could figure out where the shots were coming from.
Which was a major issue because they go on this spree and they start shooting people seemingly at random. And it's crazy how people would look around and they'd see a lot of description was a white van speeding away.
Yeah, I mean, people were getting pulled over and arrested in white vans.
So many people were given a description of a white van speeding away that white vans were being pulled over and arrested and then promptly released when they found no connection, no weapons.
Yes. So that brings us to the point where they get to Washington, D.C. October 3rd, 2002, there was a 39-year-old man named James Buchanan. He's a landscaper. He's mowing this lawn, and Muhammad, again, would stay in the driver's seat. All the windows are tinted, and Malvo would be riding around in the back seat.
And so
what's really crazy about all this, too, is They ended up finding later on a Sony Vaio computer. You probably remember those.
I do remember Sony Vaio computers.
They also had a solar...
They were the best thing until the Intel Core 2 Duos came out.
That's it. Yeah. And so then they also had a solar charger for that computer. And they had a shooting log and a log of areas that they had scouted out that would be the best places to wreak havoc. And they had maps and clothing and vitamins and then, of course, the rifle. But they're...
Do you remember the map books and the road atlas and those things?
Yeah, exactly. And so they had scouted all these places. So October 3rd, 2002, this James Buchanan, who's a landscaper, is mowing this lawn.
Right.
And, okay, mind you, there again, Muhammad would drive. Lee Malvo would be sitting in the back. They would drive to this idealized spot. He'd tell him, hey, get in the trunk. He gets in the trunk, and he waits till it's all clear, no cars around, and then Muhammad gives the command.
Lee Malvo
takes this shot and shoots Buchanan between the left shoulder and the spine. And that James Buchanan runs just a few yards, falls over dead. And so that was the first known shooting in Washington, D.C. connected with this.
Yeah, and then didn't they go on to do 3 more shootings?
3 more. Prem Kumar, that same day, was killed at a mobile gas station. Sarah Ramos, 25 minutes later, she was a nanny, like a housekeeper.
Uh-huh.
She was sitting outside reading a book on this bench, waiting on her boss to pick her up, and they shoot and kill her. The bullet goes actually through her and into the glass of the shop where she's at. And then just an hour after that, a 25-year-old woman by the name of Lori Louise Rivera was shot while she's vacuuming her car at this Shell gas station.
Yeah, no, I do remember I think it was after that happened that the fear was pretty widespread. So once they get to Washington, D.C., then it was national news.
It was national news, and by that point, I remember personally, like, you didn't want to stand outside and pump gas, because keep in mind, we didn't know if this was terrorist related. We didn't think of it as domestic terror.
Yeah, we just had 9/11 and the anthrax thing, and now we got this sniper.
Yeah, so we didn't know, are they going to be shooting and they're going to kill 5 people in Washington, D.C., then they're going to kill 5 people in New York, and at the same time you're going to have people shooting in Atlanta and Los Angeles. So I was traveling at that time, and in my travels, I spent a lot of time in Los Angeles, and some in Vegas, and then quite a bit in Phoenix, and then the Bay Area of California. And I remember pumping gas and keeping an eye out or getting in my car completely because of the fear of this thing. So these people are there. She's vacuuming her car.
Right.
And they shoot.
Everybody's scared.
Everybody's scared.
I'm scared over on the West Coast, yeah.
Okay, so actually, just pausing for just briefly, about this Lori Rivera.
Okay.
Kind of an interesting story. Her husband, his name is Nelson. He still is with us today and pretty vocal about his wife. But he had a very interesting way that he met her.
Okay.
So he meets Lori, his wife, at a church function.
Okay. Yeah.
But mind you, Nelson, the husband, speaks no English.
Oh.
Okay, he can't speak a lick of English. And she doesn't speak any Spanish. Now, he was an immigrant. He had recently immigrated from Central America.
So this must be a bilingual church.
I guess. So they're at this church function. He meets her. He can't speak any English, but yet they hit it off. How? Because they couldn't even communicate.
With the language barrier.
Yeah, they couldn't communicate. And they started going together, even though they couldn't speak the same language. And they both committed.
Well, they couldn't argue, I guess.
I guess not. But they both committed to learn the language, and pretty soon they had learned enough to where they could communicate. They got married. They have a daughter named Joseline. And so in the middle of all this, he is going to work one day.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets this call. And it's an police officer, and the police officer asked him, "Are you alone in the car?" And he said, "No, I'm not." And they said, "Give the phone to whoever you're with." Well, it happened to be his brother. And his brother takes the phone, and they said, "Tell him to pull over right now." So he pulls over, and he says, "Hand the phone back to him." And it was at that point that he tells him that his wife has just been murdered.
Oh, man, that's really sad.
You think about all of the absolute terror and fear, and there was just so much going on at this time. And so 12 hours after that, there was another person shot. He was 72 years old. He's crossing the street. And didn't they want some kind of ransom or
Well, yeah, so at this point, they start leaving behind notes. So they leave behind like a tarot card and a note that says, "Call me God." So they're kind of like leaving these these things behind for the police to find, these messages.
Yes, and Lee Malvo was the one that actually wrote the note.
Yeah, Lee Malvo was. That's
but
right.
he was doing it
the young kid. He's 17.
as commanded by
John Muhammad. So Lee Malvo actually left behind more letters later on. He left behind a letter that demanding $10 million with one of their other victims.
Wow. Well, how
I don't know how they planned on collecting it.
I was just going to ask, how in the world would you collect that kind of money?
How would they collect it? How would they not get caught? I don't think he was thinking. I think he was 17 years old and just wanted money.
Now, here's the other thing.
Who knows?
So I always had thought, for some reason, I don't know why I thought this, that all of these shootings transpired out of the back of this Chevy Caprice.
No, they didn't.
They did not. You're exactly right.
Well, those robberies, for instance, they actually went into the liquor store in Alabama, robbed it. They didn't shoot from their car. They killed 2 people point blank range.
Yes.
Just like the gentleman that just bought those sneakers.
Yeah, but once they got to Washington, D.C., they didn't do all of their shootings from the back of a car. They did all of them but 2. 2 of them, they actually got outside the car. In fact, one of them, Linda Franklin, was the victim. She had just come out with her husband out of Home Depot, and they were standing there loading a truck. Lee Malvo had got out of the car. This is an amazing shot when you think about this. He had got out of the car, set up a sniper's nest in a vacant parking lot.
Whoa.
He shot completely across the parking lot, across a highway, across another parking lot, and shot this woman in the head from that long of a shot.
Wow, what a shot. I do know the rifle that they found when they finally catch these people was the AR we mentioned. It only had a holographic sight.
So no scope.
No scope. Yeah,
no scope.
So the optics weren't quite for long range.
Yeah, and the fact that he was shooting that long range and to be that accurate without a scope is pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is impressive. It's horrible, but
it's horrible.
Impressive.
Yes. So around this same time,
so they have a tip line set up. The FBI sets up a tip line, and people are calling in, leaving tips, and mostly tips about the vehicle speeding away. Well, unfortunately, the people speeding away were people getting away from the gunshots.
Yes, they were scared.
So they were given descriptions of these white vans and different things, which are completely wrong vehicles. They're chasing down dead ends because people are seeing vehicles speed away from gunshots, and they think that's the perpetrator, but it wasn't.
Okay.
And it isn't until they get a tip from... Actually, Lee Malvo calls in. He calls in the tip line himself. The perpetrator calls the tip line and says, "Hey, you guys should look into the shooting in Alabama. That's also connected to this case. You guys aren't giving them credit." So he wants more credit. He wants more glory, more accolades for his killings. Well, so the police do. They look into the shooting in Alabama, but it was a robbery, and they left behind fingerprints. When the FBI ran his fingerprints, it led them to an immigration document. That immigration document said Lee Malvo on it.
There you go.
So they knew exactly who one of the perpetrators was now.
So Lee Malvo has basically moved to the top of the charts on their suspect list. And what's hilarious is they would have never even thought to put that all together if he hadn't called.
Well, I'd refrain from using never, but it was pretty unlikely that they would have found him if he hadn't called in. And
at least nearly as fast as they did. Yes.
Right.
Okay, so at the same time, while he's calling the tip line, there's another friend of John Muhammad, a man by the name of Robert Holmes that we already spoke about.
Yeah, and Robert Holmes calls the tip line.
Yes, he's an old friend. He's following this story, and he remembers that Lee, he had talked to John.
Did they release Lee's name to the public?
I believe they had.
Okay.
And so he recognizes, hey, Lee was with John. And so he calls the FBI. Of course, once the FBI got involved, they just started grilling him on who this John Muhammad was. And pretty soon, things start coming together. Now, they were having a hard time getting a profile on this guy.
Right, because the victims were so diverse. It was seemingly at random.
Yes.
And come to find out, it was random. And that's why they were having such a hard time building a
there was no
case
victimology in it because there was no, he's only killing black men or he's only killing white men or he's only killing middle-aged people or women. Or it was he would kill a 72-year-old man here, and then a 51-year-old man here, and then a child, and then a woman.
He
and
killed
then
like a 15-year-old kid and just outside of a high school.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like it was so distorted in the victims. None of them were the same. None of them. So they couldn't figure out who is this guy.
Yeah, so they get that tip and they realize, hey, they now know both the perpetrators. And because they're able to find John Muhammad, they are able to track down the vehicle he purchased under his own name, which is the Chevy Caprice. So now they're looking for the right vehicle, the right license plate number, and they put out a all points bulletin where they, hey, be on the lookout for this guy.
Yes. So they
released it to the public as well.
They released it to the public. They killed one last guy October 22nd, 2002. So this carried on for 23 days. And they killed this man named Conrad Johnson, who was a bus driver. He'd help his elderly passengers and all that. He was standing on the steps of his bus, and they shoot him. And later that evening is when the warrant was issued for the arrest. And so not long after that, of course, it's broadcast all over news.
Everybody's on the lookout for this blue Chevy Caprice.
Exactly. And so a truck driver sees this car. He had heard the radio broadcast while he was driving his truck, and he had written down the license plate number. And so he sees it, he calls it in, and sure enough,
they're stopped at a rest area.
They're a rest area off the highway. And so the police close in, and that's where they actually captured these two.
They close in. There's no response out of the car. They get closer, and John and Lee are both sleeping
in the car. Yes. So that they arrested him without incident.
So yeah, that's how they're caught. It was pretty much the tip line that did it, and the people that called into the tip line about the prosecution.
Wait. Hold on.
What do you got? I'm ready to rumble.
So there's also something else that was first used. Not only were they trying to build the profile, but
there was that one FBI agent that did report that method they used. That's right.
So it's basically, they call it the human scent evidence team. It's now called ERTU.
I've never heard of it.
So basically, everything, all crime scenes, in addition to collecting fingerprints and DNA and other things like that, you can also technicians can collect human scents using
their pennies?
Their
No? Oh.
No, scents.
Oh, scent. Okay.
Yes. So so they take a vacuum and they'll vacuum up DNA evidence like hair and stuff like that. But they take this vacuum, they vacuum up the DNA evidence, and then they have a separate vacuum that they vacuum up human scent traces. And then those scents that are vacuumed up, which can be obtained from almost any object. They vacuum that scent and then they store it in this vacuum sealed.
It sounds like pseudoscience.
It's crazy, but they store it in this airtight glass jar, and they can stay there for just a long extended period of time. So these dogs are trained to smell the collected scent. They sniff the scent pad, and then if there's a matching trail of human odor, the dogs follow the invisible odor highway in the same way humans would follow streets and roadways. So, bloodhounds have followed blood scent for years.
Right.
But now you can actually, anything you touch leaves your human scent on it.
Okay.
And so what these dogs do is technicians
they'll get the scent profile from the sample, and then they can track it to the person.
Track it.
That makes sense, because I've heard about dogs like sniffing. If you have like a young boy that's lost, say, hey, sniff the boy's old shirt. Here you go. The dog gets the scent from what the boy smells like. Then he can go find the boy. He's only 50 yards away into the forest, right?
Yeah.
He's playing hide and seek.
But the biggest difference here is these dogs can do this because the scent is preserved. Mm-hmm. It can be years after, and it could be hundreds of miles away.
That's really neat. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. So basically, John Doe could commit a crime in California, and then 5 years later, he might move to Nebraska, and
they just mail the scent profile over there. They can
take that scent profile over there 5 years later, and if that man still has that smell, that dog will pick up on that and will say, "Hey, yep." And so they can collect that. It's just crazy.
I wonder if that holds up in court, because I've never researching the true crime stuff. I haven't heard about this.
Okay, so it is one. They say that it's one of the FBI's most effective tools.
Oh, that's right. The one
And
FBI agent did say that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and they say that it's one of its least known weapons.
Oh,
yeah.
well, there you
so
go.
they
Least
don't use
known.
it.
That's
Yep.
why I don't know about it. There we go.
But pretty amazing. So, anyways,
So, yeah, going back to the prosecution of these guys, once they catch them, they're both prosecuted. The prosecutors argued that Muhammad's motive was to kill his wife, Mildred, but it would be too obvious if he just killed his wife, Mildred, ex-wife.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided to have Lee Malvo commit these random killings to throw the police off the trail.
okay.
So that's what the prosecution went with, and he was convicted and sentenced to death, put to death on November 10th, 2009, executed by lethal injection.
Got it. Okay. Now, what about
Lee Malvo took a plea bargain. I think he's serving 3 consecutive life sentences, and he's still on his first one because they're all over 25 or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so didn't something recently?
Yes, a recent development in Lee Malvo's case is a few months ago. He got married while incarcerated.
How in the world?
Not sure.
That is so weird to me. I know that happens frequently with these, active
Serial
shooters
killers and
yeah. And yet there's a women, that will write them and they'll fall in love supposedly and then marry them. And it's like, it's so weird to me. Anyways, not to get off track, but
yeah, that is a strange thing, but he's married now, and that's a recent development. His first term is almost up, and he's going to serve his other 2, I believe.
okay.
And yeah, he'll probably be in there until he dies.
Yeah, these, I want to say to all of the victims' families, our heart goes out to you. And
Yeah,
our
it is
thoughts
tragic. That one story you told about the man when he received the call when he was driving, that is really tragic. So yeah,
there
is a terrible thing.
And if you Google it, they have created quite the memorial.
Oh, really?
For these victims from this DC sniper case, and it's a beautiful memorial. And so we want to say to all of the victims' families, we appreciate you hanging in there and sharing your stories with so many people like us. And we salute you. We feel for you and the hurt and the pain that you've been through.
Yeah, and all the FBI and the police and the first responders out there keeping us safe from crazy people like this.
Yes, oh man,
I'm sure there's lots of things in place to prevent this happening in the future and stop it more quickly and whatever they're doing. They're out there every day working on circumventing and preventing this stuff.
Yes, and so we appreciate all those first responders, all of you that are doing your job so adamantly, man. We really salute you.
And thank you to all of our listeners. We are loving the feedback you're giving us. This show was one of your suggestions. Don't forget, if you have a show suggestion, to email us at thegabelpodcast@gmail.com. That's THEGABL podcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you, and
we read all the feedback
we read all
we
of them,
get.
of course,
and also we do hope very soon to have more content coming out on a more frequent
definitely.
basis.
Yeah,
Yes.
we have a lot of stuff coming in, so keep them coming. The more ideas you give us, the more things we're able to research simultaneously, and we will be putting up shows more frequently.
Yes.
With all this fun stuff to research. So appreciate that. Appreciate you guys, and we look forward to hearing from you. We'll talk to you soon.
Adios.